Welcome to Christ Church for the End Times Live. My name is Lauren, and I will be bringing the message today. The title of our message is Influencer of Christ in a Time Such as This. And we will be reading from the book of Esther. And I believe I have read the book of Esther before, but there was something super exciting about reading it this time. I was asking my husband as I was studying, I was like, do you ever just read a part of the word? My son is in the process of trying to climb the stage. But I asked him, do you ever get so excited reading the word and seeing God move and work and seeing his fingerprints all over and seeing him in action and just get so excited? You're just like, yeah, God. Like just me hanging out on the bed by myself, studying the book of Esther, just getting revelation after revelation, being so excited to see the work that he did in and through her life and how he used her, which we're going to get into. I'm going to summarize the entire book. But it was just so exciting to just see him move. And just a fun fact that I learned, that the name God is not referenced or used not once in the book of Esther, but you see evidence of his existence all over it. So to summarize our book here, let's see. I can take all mistakes for love on pronouncing these names. They had some funky names back in the day, that's all I'm saying. So King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace. He threw a feast for all the princes and servants, people who were great and small. He threw a beautiful 7-day feast, and the queen, I'm just summarizing the book. So the queen of this palace, her name was Queen Vashti, and threw her own feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to the king. She was doing her own separate thing. And on the 7th day of the feast that the king had thrown, he wanted everyone to see Queen Vashti and her beauty, so he sent his guys to go get her, and she refused to come at the king's command. This upset the king. Queen Vashti not only wronged the king, but they saw that she had wronged all the princes as well, because women and wives look up to the queen. And if she didn't show up for the king, how are all these women going to treat and honor their princes and husbands? They didn't want them to start despising their royal position. The king is giving up Queen Vashti's place for another queen who is better than she, more worthy. So Queen Vashti just got booted for not showing up. So the king requested a young, beautiful virgin to be sought for the king under the custody of, here's another name, Haggai, I think, the king's eunuch. The woman who pleases the king most will be queen instead of Vashti. At the time, there was a Jewish man in Shushan. His name was Mordecai. This man had a very beautiful, lovely young cousin who was called Esther. When her parents died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. Esther was one of the women taken to the king's palace under the custody of Haggai. Esther pleased Haggai and obtained favor, so he readily gave her beauty treatments. These beauty treatments were her preparation to fulfill the shoes or heels of the queen. She went through 6 months of oil of myrrh and 6 months of perfume with preparation for beautifying women. Each woman had their chance to see the king after she had completed the 12 months of preparation. Esther's cousin, Mordecai, had told Esther not to reveal her people or family, which she obeyed. She never revealed who her family came from. And every day he would pace in front of the court to learn Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. When it was Esther's turn to approach the king, she obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. The king loved him some Esther more than all the other women. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now remember, Mordecai would hang out at the king's gate. And one of the times he was out there, he heard two doorkeepers plotting to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And Mordecai reported this information to Esther, and then Esther then informed the king in Mordecai's name, and both were hanged on the gallows, and it was written, this part is important for us to remember for a later statement, it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Later, the king promoted Haman, making him the most powerful official in the empire. All the king officials would bow down before Haman to show respect wherever he would pass by. This is what the king commanded, and our beloved Mordecai refused to bow down and show Haman this respect. Officials at the king gate would ask Mordecai, like, what are you doing? Why do you refuse to bow down to Mordecai? And he had told them that he was Jew. Haman then learned that Mordecai's nationality and was so filled with rage toward him that he thought killing Mordecai wasn't quite enough, but going after all the Jews might justify. So he wanted to go and destroy all the Jews throughout the empire. Haman had a decree written and sealed, sent out with the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be destroyed, killed, annihilated on a single day. The news traveled around, it got to Mordecai and all the other Jews, and they were all mourning. Mordecai was begging Esther to help. He had sent a written letter, this new law that was written, in hopes that she would read through it and help them. So to plead to the king that they would save her life and her people. Esther's response was, all the king's servants and people of king's provenance know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, and that is to put all to death except to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called, aka if she goes to talk to the king, she's going to be killed. So, in God speaking through Mordecai, don't think for a moment that because you're in a palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are filled. Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. And Esther says, go gather all of the Jews, fast for me for 3 days, 3 nights, do not eat anything. And she's going to go against the law. I will go in and see the king. If I must die, I must die. So she's willing to sacrifice everything, even if it's her own life, to obey God and to save herself and her people. Esther puts on her royal robe, heads over to see the king, knowing this may be the very thing that kills her, but she was willing to put her life on the line and obey God. As Esther approaches the king held out the golden scepter. And you all say, favor. God had favor over Esther's life. God isn't going to ask us to do anything without having his hands all over it and equipping every move and action to go through it. You can imagine the fear she must have felt, but she still chose to trust God in such a time as this. Oh, goodness. Okay, so I think I'm reading. I see my notes here. It says read chapter 5, verse 3 through 8. So I'm going to turn to that. Pastor Bennett, if you're able to turn to that. Chapter 5, verse 3 through 8. It says, and the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given up to half the kingdom. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. Esther answered and said, this, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and it pleases the king to grant my petition and fill my request, then let's have dinner again tomorrow. You and Haman both, like, come on. And she says that her petition requested, she's about to say it, she's right there, but then she pauses and then she changes it to let's have dinner again, but why? She's come this far, she's made it to the king, he held out the scepter. It's not that what she was going to say was wrong, it's just the timing wasn't right. And we will see that because there's going to be a sequence of events that take place after this banquet that would have been too soon. Haman leaves a happy man until he runs across Mordecai, but makes Haman mad. And Haman goes to express himself to his wife, and he says, life is good, everything's going great, but there's this Jew guy that won't bow down to me, and it really makes me mad. And his wife's like, we're not going to take that, will the gallows and hang him. And Haman goes, that's an excellent idea. And so he had the gallows made. That night, the king couldn't sleep, so he requested, this is important because we talked about this before, the book of the records of the Chronicles. This book was read to the king, and they specifically read about the story where Mordecai had the king's back, and he had reported those two doorkeepers that were plotting to kill him. They were reading through this story, and the king's like, did we ever do anything for this guy who saved my life? Did we ever honor him in some way? And the servant said, no, we didn't do anything for him. And it just so happens that Haman is coming in the same time the king is trying to figure out what to do to honor Mordecai and saving his life. And without mentioning Mordecai's name to Haman, the king asks him, what should we do to somebody the king delights and honors? And in Haman's heart, he thinks, he's talking about me. And he gives his best spiel. So we're going to go to chapter 6 and read verse 7 through 10 to see what Haman said that should be done for someone the king honors and has delight in. So that is chapter 6, 7. Okay, it says, then Haman answered and said, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, and they may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights and honors. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and go do this for Mordecai, as the Jew who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone that you have spoken. Ouch. I mean, God's doing his work. Please tell me you see it. So Haman did what the king asked, and after he finished, he hurried home to his wife and buried his head, and he mourned. He's pretty much depressed at this point. The very person Haman wanted to kill just got promoted, just got elevated, just became second in command. And verse 14 reads, while they were still talking, the king's eunuchs come and hurried to bring Haman to the banquet, which Esther had prepared. And while is so important because they were still in the midst of talking when they arrived to hurry him on to the next scene. God didn't give him any time to plot or plan or run or come up with any scheme. So he arrives to the banquet. Everyone's there. The king, Haman, Queen Esther. And remember, this is the second banquet. If Esther had not waited, those sequence of events would not have taken place, and Mordecai wouldn't have been elevated, and things would be so differently. So King again asks Esther, what is your petition? What is going on? And let's read together chapter 7, 3 through 10. Reads, then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So King Ahasuerus, thank you, said to Queen Esther, Who is he? And where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is the wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, this is important, pleading for his life. For he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. So Esther was laying on the couch. Haman's pleading for his life, hanging all over her. As the king walks in, and the king says, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? So you're going to assault my wife right here after you just did all this and tried to kill her. So it's safe to say the king was hot. He was angry. He was full of anger. As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. The king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. Haman literally dug his own grave. He literally reaped what he sowed. We got to remember, reaping and sowing isn't just for good stuff. We can reap and sow bad things that we plant and harvest as well. But now we have this law that Haman wrote that unfortunately cannot be revoked. And Esther is in tears, implored, which means to beg someone earnestly or desperately to do something to save her and her people, the Jews. Revoke this letter, king, please. Unfortunately, whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring cannot be revoked. But the king told Esther and Mordecai to come up with something, a law concerning the Jews as they see fit, as they please, in the king's name, and to seal it with a signet ring that he had taken from Haman and gave to Mordecai. And whatever decree they came up with too cannot be revoked. The new decree that was written gave all Jews permission to avenge themselves on their enemies. They were not only allowed to protect their own lives, but they were allowed to destroy, kill, and annihilate that tried to assault them, including their wives and children, and plunder their possessions. And when the Jews learned of this new law, the Bible states that they had light and gladness and joy and honor, and people of the land became Jews because of the fear of the Jews fell upon them. And just to close on the summary of the book of Esther, Esther's preparation, her position, her obedience saved her people and all the Jews. There are a lot of unsaved people in this world, and not only that, but there are a lot of, and I'm doing quote-unquote believers in this world that are heading straight to hell, and that is scary. And I'm just going to use myself as an example, the old me. I wasn't going around sleeping around. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't drinking. I did cuss a lot. I dishonored my parents. I wasn't mean to my neighbors or my friends. I had a big heart. I loved hard, and I was very giving. I had Southern hospitality and great customer service skills, and I was on my way to hell. Why? Because I was still walking a life of sin. I was living a life not pleasing to God. I thought being a good person meant nothing bad would happen to me, and I thought that was an automatic pass to go to heaven because I was a good person, because I loved and I gave. Even though I did other things, overall, my moral values were, pretty good, and I thought that was my path to heaven. Like, I was good. I just believe in God's existence, and that's enough. I can keep living any kind of way. I wasn't born again. Once you get, let me make sure I'm not skipping anything good here. Okay, yeah. I wasn't born again, and once you get saved, salvation isn't earned, by the way. It's a free gift given to each of us if we simply believe. And then you're gifted the Holy Spirit, but then those old things inside of you are passed away with, and all things are to become new. Your desires change to His desires. You start wanting and craving the life God has for you. And you're convicted when you've gotten off track. And conviction, I always tell people, conviction is so good because it keeps us on that path of righteousness. And if we don't have conviction, there's a problem. We might need to reevaluate ourselves and stir up some of the good things inside of us. And so I got resaved, born again, I'll say. I believed in God's existence, right? But at 19, I truly got saved. At 19, I truly gave my life to the Lord. At 19, I committed myself to building an intimate relationship with Him and trying every single day and choosing Him every single day to be the best I could be as a wife, a one-day mom, as a friend, as a daughter, whatever the case may be. I wanted to represent Christ. Was I perfect? No. We all have fallen. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. None is righteous, no, not one. But I knew, and I know now, and I have a confidence, I know exactly where I'm going. And I don't plan to change that. So the book of Esther should show each of us that one person can make a difference. God intervened spiritually on Esther's behalf. She became queen of, am I saying this right, Persia, and saved the entire nation when she was an orphan and a Jew. Without going through the preparation of all her beauty treatments, would she have caught the king's attention and gained favor in his sight? She had to go through a preparation period which took 12 months. And I believe God has a calling and a purpose for each of our lives. And we all play a significant role in our lives, and our preparation may not be a year of beauty treatments, but our assignment may not also to be to save an entire nation. But whatever He has for you is important, and we all have a form of ministry. That doesn't always mean up here on the pulpit. That doesn't always mean on the worship team or some big platform. Ministry can be something as simple as gardening. And we'll get further into that. But I wanted to share a quick story. It's one of my favorite testimonies and stories to share. It gives me so much joy to think about, even though it was some trying times. But I shared a little bit before. In 2019, I had heard a small, still voice tell me that 2020, and it's not always I get to hear a year or a specific date or anything. This was actually probably one of the only times I've heard like an actual date of something happening in my life. But that small, still voice told me in 2020 would be the year that I would conceive. And my immediate response was, oh no, God, Like this is the complete opposite and not the right season to conceive. And I said that because we were deep in debt. And I had just left my full-time job to go to school full-time, but then I failed the test to get into school, so now I am unemployed, not in school, deep in debt. Deep in debt. And on top of that, going through some really hard marriage challenges. So God's response was, are you doubting the things that I can do in your life? I remember hearing that so clear. And I thought, how do you argue? I journaled it, got my, hearing on it, and being me and all excited. I'm like, well, if 2020 is the year I'm going to conceive, let me go prepare in the sense of baby announcement stuff. So I went and bought all the fun little gifts that I wanted to surprise the family with, whenever that would be. No idea, he meant January 2020. I was like, barely made it into the new year, God. And in the midst of the dark, I was confused, and I was scared, and I was angry, and I was devastated, and the devil gave me all the wrong thoughts. At a time I was vulnerable and broken. And while I always had faith in God, knowing that things were going to work out together for my good, there still was that moment of, why did God, is the confusion. Because we know that the enemy comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. God gives us life, and he gives it more abundantly. Our God is not an Indian giver. And I knew these things, but in the midst of my hurt, I had forgotten a little bit. And that was part of like my anger, but they nor expected to get the answer as to why it had to happen or to me. And I was mad at the devil for coming after my seed. And though I was terrified to try again, I did it afraid. We prayed, we fasted, we got our prayer warriors praying, and 20 days later, we conceived again. And it was, I don't know if that's supposed to be some miracle or not, but the doctors were really confused at how fast it happened. So I was like, okay, that was a God thing then 20 days later. And then I was happy in the flesh. And so make sure. Now, if you know me, you know I record and blog everything. I call myself a memory hoarder. So I'm not an influencer unless you have an X amount of followings, but God says you can influence now by letting your light so shine among men. And that's where I want to turn to Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 through 16. Believers are the salt and the light. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world, a city that is set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. If you're feeling not qualified, I verify you right now with the blue check. A lot of people who aren't on social media might not know what that means, but if you're on social media, you understand what that means. Only people that are verified have their little blue famous check, but I verify you right now with your no followers, with your no social media, with your 1 follower, your 10 followers, because you can influence and you have the ability and you have the power to change the lives of the circle you have, whether that be a best friend or a family member. You are not here by mistake. Remember, our God is an intentional God. Don't leave the work for the church or the people on the platforms. There's going to be a job God has for you that only you can do. But now, obviously, if God needs something to be done and you won't do it, he's going to get the job done through somebody else. But there's going to be lives that you can connect with and you can save and you can bless that I could never. Because maybe they won't open up to me like they would for you. I can guarantee none of our lives are the same. None of our trials, none of our tribulations that we went through. We may have similar stories, but the way they played out and the way they affected us are differently. Your testimony is your testimony, and you're going to touch lives with what you overcome through Christ. You get the opportunity to share that same God that healed and delivered you onto someone else who needs healing and deliverance too. Everyone's purpose is going to be different, and I think it's hilarious. I love Joyce Myers. I love listening to, I always say it's the female version of Pastor Bennett, like they preach the truth. She just has just a little sprinkle of, like, I guess, feminine sensitivity on top of it, but she she tells a story about how she used to want to speak so bad, and she would pray, and she just wanted a big ministry, and she just wanted it so bad, but it didn't happen when she wanted it to. She said, didn't happen when she wanted to because she wasn't ready. She had to go through that preparation, that same preparation that Esther went through. She said that she was still teaching Bible studies in booty shorts and smoking cigarettes. So God still had to mold Miss Myers into the woman of God that she is now. And another thing that she shared that I thought was hilarious because it's true and we can resonate with it is she said she was trying to be an evangelist and just trying out different forms of ministry to see which one she falls under or enjoys. And I guess they were going around door to door giving out CDs, and she says, I hated it. It wasn't for me. And then she tried the nursery, and she said, I think the kids know it wasn't for me. And now she's obviously Joyce Myers Ministry and doing her thing. All the glory to God. And maybe God is grooming and preparing you to save your family. Maybe your best friend, maybe your classmate, your unbelieving husband or wife. Maybe you're to be a marriage counselor that's going to guide other marriages to prosper. Maybe it's being a chef or being on the worship team or being a teacher and educator and pouring into and shedding your light in the classroom to your kids. Maybe it's a gardener. Maybe it's to be a stay-at-home mom and serve and nurture your family. Many of us go through life never knowing what our purpose is, and a lot of the times it's because we make our own life plans rather than following the leading of the Holy Spirit. Letting go and following God takes sacrifice and willingness to be uncomfortable. Ooh, and it's scary, especially when it doesn't make sense. Y'all, I am a type A. I love organization. I love structure. I love schedules. I love knowing all the things. I love being in control. That does not work well when you're planning to work in the kingdom. Have you ever found yourself planning every detail of your life out, and you have these visions and desires and dreams that you'd like to see play out, but something happens to disrupt those plans? We often resist and are not happy about the change, but no matter what we do, this new thing seems to be God's will for us. And we cannot imagine how this could possibly turn out well, but then it does, because God knows all, sees all, and has us in his best interest, and he can do exceedingly abundantly more than we could ask or think. Just like he did for Esther and Mordecai. But if she wasn't willing to get uncomfortable and obey God, she would perish along with all the other Jews. I can't promise as believers you won't go through some things, because we do. We're believers. Like, our life, we have life, true life, everlasting life when we commit our life over to God. But that is not where we celebrate and everything's just fine and dandy for the rest of our lives. We go through some things, and the way the world's set up, you guys, is rough on some Christians. And I'll back up to my viral TikTok. While it blessed a lot of lives and sowed a lot of seeds, there was also a lot of hate. There was a lot of hate. And that's why, it was hard to process, even because I'm not used to being hated on as being a Christian. I'm not used to having someone be mean to me or tear me down because of my belief. I had people telling me, don't think this God, you need to think your husband you got pregnant. And I'm like, I thank God for my husband and the seeds that were given to me to conceive. But there were just a lot of hate, and it just came with it. And while it did hurt at first, God gave me a different way to look at it. And it's like, there's just lost souls out there. And it is our job to shed the light and just do our part. And if they receive, they receive. And we'll get into that here in a moment as well. But I can't promise it's all going to work out. Oh, I'm sorry. I can promise. I can't promise as believers you won't go through some things, but I can promise it'll all work out. The Bible tells us time and time again, do not fear. Do not be afraid. This doesn't mean we won't feel fear. We just aren't going to dwell in it. And we won't be fearful. And we won't be afraid. We will be bold. We will be courageous. And just know and have a confidence that he is with us always. I'm not God, so I can't tell you what your purpose is, but I want to encourage each of you to seek God for it. Be willing to pick up the cross day after day and live for him. If you chose to live for him every day, you can't go wrong. Ask God to reveal to you and to make it clear, make it plain. Operate in his peace, and just remember, God isn't in the microwave industry. There will be preparation processes. There will be training in place. And don't let the fear of what that preparation may look like hold you back from fulfilling your God-given purpose and ministry. This is just a personal story, a day that I was praying, and I'm like, God, am I where you want me to be? Am I where you need me to be? Open up the door, make it clear, make it plain, take me to that place you want me to be. I want to be where you want me to be. That's where I want to be. And then in the middle of saying that, I was like, what did I just ask for? Because I don't know what the preparation process is about to look like, but I can't let the fear of that stop me and make me stay stagnant and not fulfill the calling and the purpose that God has for my life. Because I know that God works all things together for good, and it is just going to build you and sustain you into that person that he has ordained you to be. You're never too old, and you can never have too little mobility to walk into your purpose and influence those around you. And I know a lot of us remember No Arm, No Leg Nick, I think his name was. And, when you look at someone who has no arms and no legs, you automatically think they can't do anything. what's their point in life kind of thing. But this guy, miraculous, did all the things, married, has a kid, and he speaks and encourages people. It's awesome. He's awesome. And that just goes to show you that God can use you if you have no arms and no legs. And he can use you if you're 90 to 100. I mean, look at Abraham and Sarah conceiving in their hundreds. If anyone needs a God-fearing you, it's this generation, this day, right now. We've got non-believers in the world, don't even know anything about God. We're having school shootings. People just going around with hate. People who hate the church because we got corrupt people in the church, in authoritative positions who are taking advantage, prophesying, or I'm going to say preaching nonsense, things that are not of the Bible. And I'm seeing posts on social media from my friends who are saying, like, how do y'all feel about the church? And I'm reading the comments, and everybody had negative things to say about the church because of the negative people in the world who are causing the corrupt minds of what the church is. There's so much division because so many minds are corrupted and people are so easily offended. And to disagree means we're non-supportive and we hate. Mental health and anxiety, depression is taking over, and people are drowning in grief and sorrow, lacking hope. They need us. This world needs you in such a time as this. Like, if we just look around and we see how chaotic it is out in the world right now, you to do your part so that lives can be saved. We are, and we hear in the Bible that the end times are coming. We know what that looks like. But this doesn't mean sit and wait around and just let those things take place. We need to be the influencer of Christ. We need to be the light in this world. We need to live out his truth and draw men to his kingdom. Be the Esther in your generation, in your workplace, in your home. Newsflash. We are the church. And the church extends further than the four walls that we're in right now, or those who are watching this online. It goes beyond the monitor. It goes beyond the hearing of the screen and the YouTube videos or the podcasts that you listen to. Plant it in your heart. Let it take root. Let it saturate in you and change the very person. Like, everybody's going to be different. It doesn't mean you have to be a pastor. You don't have to go around seeking a position up on the pulpit. You can share the word through the way you live your life and let your light shine. I want to read 2 Timothy chapter 3. Let me turn to there real quick. It's perilous times and perilous men. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, traitors,